Look at a map of the United States today, and you see fixed, rigid lines. But 20,000 years ago, during the last ice age, this continent had no borders. A massive land bridge connected what is now Russia to Alaska, allowing the first human hunter-gatherers to cross over before sea levels began to rise and swallowed the path behind them. Over thousands of years, those early arrivals fanned out. They adapted to different climates and geographies, forming a vast patchwork of distinct societies, languages, and cultures across the entire North American landscape. Many of these communities built complex civilizations. The Mississippian culture constructed raised earthen cities and elaborate ceremonial burial mounds, sustaining thousands of people through an organized, continent-wide trading network. In 1492, 3 wooden ships arrived in the Bahamas. Christopher Columbus's voyages opened the door to a flood of European explorers. But the collision of these 2 isolated worlds brought foreign diseases, wiping out an estimated 90% of the native population. The original map of indigenous territories was fading. In its place, Spanish, French, and English empires began claiming huge, overlapping regions, each seeking to extract wealth and exert control over the newfound continent. By the mid-18th century, France had laid a massive claim to the interior of the continent. Wedged along the eastern seaboard, the English held much less land, but their 13 colonies had a far denser population. These English settlements, particularly in places like Jamestown, Virginia, evolved into highly lucrative agricultural hubs. They grew rich exporting cash crops, with tobacco plantations expanding rapidly to meet demand across the Atlantic. That explosive economic growth required an immense amount of manual labor. Plantation owners filled this need by importing indentured servants from Europe and forcing enslaved Africans to work the fields under brutal conditions. By the 1760s, the coast had become a highly profitable resource engine for the British. But as the Crown struggled to repay its war debts, it turned to these colonies for revenue, creating a tax burden that sparked immediate unrest. The British government imposed a series of heavy taxes on everyday items like glass, tea, and paper. The colonists revolted against this taxation without representation. Armed militias formed, leading to a grueling war for independence that culminated in the drafting of a new constitution. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris recognized the United States as independent, pushing its borders west to the Mississippi River. 20 years later, for $15 million, President Thomas Jefferson bought the Louisiana Territory from France, effectively doubling the size of the nation overnight. The government adopted the belief of manifest destiny, the idea that the United States was meant to expand all the way to the Pacific Ocean. To clear the path, President Andrew Jackson enforced the removal of thousands of Native Americans from their ancestral lands, resulting in deadly forced marches like the Trail of Tears. Expansion continued with the acquisition of California from Mexico. When news of gold in the region spread, 300,000 people flooded into the territory from all over the world, rapidly accelerating California's path to statehood. The United States now spanned from coast to coast. But every time a new territory was added, a bitter political fight erupted over whether it would be a free state or a slave state. The rapidly growing map was pulling the country apart. 2 distinct economies had taken root. The northern states had industrialized, relying on factories and railways, while the southern economy remained almost entirely dependent on cash crops and slave labor. When Abraham Lincoln was elected president, Southern leaders feared he would outlaw slavery. South Carolina seceded from the Union, and other southern states quickly followed, physically tearing the country in two. The American Civil War brought combat to an industrial scale. Railroads, telegrams, and repeating rifles led to massive, prolonged engagements, resulting in huge casualties on both sides over 4 brutal years. During the conflict, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It gave freedom to over 3 million slaves in the Confederate States, clarifying that the Union Army was fighting directly for human freedom. The Union's eventual victory forced a surrender from the Confederate Army. By surviving the war and passing the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery, the nation cemented a single, unified map. As the 20th century approached, the United States began projecting power beyond its shores. After the battleship USS Maine sank in Havana Harbor, the U.S. declared war on Spain, eventually claiming overseas territories like Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. To connect its Atlantic and Pacific interests, the U.S. took over the construction of the Panama Canal. Carving massive concrete locks through the continent created a strategic shipping lane that supercharged the American economy. When Europe fractured into the First World War, the U.S. initially stayed neutral. But after a German naval blockade and the interception of a telegram proposing an invasion of the U.S., the country sent infantry troops to Europe, bringing fresh manpower that helped secure an Allied victory. Barely 2 decades later, a surprise Japanese attack on the Hawaiian naval base at Pearl Harbor forced the United States into the Second World War. The nation mobilized massive resources to fight a simultaneous war in the Pacific, North Africa, and Europe. The conflict ended with the execution of the Manhattan Project. The United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, devastating the regions and forcing a Japanese surrender. The conclusion of the war left Europe divided and exhausted. The United States stood completely intact, possessing the largest industrial economy and the most powerful military force on Earth. The physical borders were set, but a new ideological conflict was just beginning. The rivalry with the communist Soviet Union escalated into the Cold War. The 2 superpowers competed for global dominance and technological supremacy. This tension fueled the space race, driving the U.S. to launch the Apollo 11 mission and successfully land the first humans on the moon. While reaching for milestones in space, the country faced severe inequality at home. African Americans organized a massive civil rights movement, led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., using nonviolent protests to dismantle legal segregation and secure the right to vote. Decades later, the attacks on September 11th proved that the nation's 2 oceans could no longer insulate it from foreign threats, pushing the United States into a modern era of borderless warfare. The borders of the United States were drawn through centuries of ambition, expansion, and conflict. But the map only shows the physical space. The actual history of the nation is the continual, ongoing effort to define what that space stands for.